The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I watched Marcus Wellington stride into the server room like he owned the place. His perfectly pressed suit, his Harvard MBA confidence, his condescending smile, everything about him screamed that he thought he was better than everyone else. Little did he know that in exactly 6 months, he'd be begging me to come back, and by then, it would be too late. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been working in IT for 12 years. Not as a manager, not as a consultant, not as some fancy title that looks good on LinkedIn. I'm a senior network technician, and I'm damn good at what I do. But apparently, that wasn't enough for Marcus Wellington, the new VP of Operations at Meridian Financial Solutions. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in the basement server room of our downtown Chicago office, working on what I called preventative magic, the kind of maintenance work that keeps everything running smoothly but that nobody notices until it stops working. The room was my sanctuary, filled with the soft whir of cooling fans and the occasional chirp of status indicators. Rows of servers blinked their steady rhythms, and I knew each one's personality like old friends. I was replacing a failing backup power supply on server bank C when I heard expensive shoes clicking down the metal stairs. Marcus appeared in the doorway, checking his Rolex like my workspace was some inconvenient pit stop on his important journey through life. "Sarah, isn't it?" he said, not waiting for an answer. "I need you to explain something to me." I looked up from my work, noting how he positioned himself so he was looking down at me even though I was standing. Everything about his posture screamed superiority complex. "Sure, what can I help you with?" The board is asking questions about our IT budget. Specifically, why we're paying senior-level wages to someone who essentially just fixes computers. The way he said "fixes computers" made it sound like I was some teenager at Best Buy. I set down my screwdriver and gave him my full attention. "Well, Marcus, I don't just fix computers. I maintain the entire network infrastructure that keeps this company running. Every transaction, every client database, every piece of financial data flows through systems that I design, implement, and maintain." He laughed. Actually, I laughed. "Come on, Sarah. Let's not oversell it. You're a technician. A very well-paid technician, but still just a technician. The real strategic work happens upstairs with people who understand business." I felt my jaw clench. "Is that right? Look, don't take it personally. There's nothing wrong with being a support staff. But I'm bringing in some changes around here, and we need to be realistic about roles and compensation. I'm thinking we could probably get someone fresh out of a community college program to do what you do for half the salary." Half the salary? Maybe less. Technology is getting easier, right? More user-friendly. It's not like the old days when you needed some kind of wizard to keep the computers running. I stared at him for a long moment. In that moment, I realized Marcus Wellington had absolutely no idea what I actually did. He saw servers and thought, big computers. He saw network cables and thought, fancy phone lines. He had no concept of the invisible architecture that made his precious business metrics possible. "Tell me something, Marcus," I said, turning back to my work. "How do you think client trades get processed here?" "Through our trading platform, obviously." "And how do you think that platform communicates with the New York Stock Exchange?" "Through the internet?" I nearly smiled. "Through a dedicated fiber optic connection that I negotiated, installed, and maintained. It runs through 17 different routing protocols that I configured personally. If it goes down for more than 30 seconds, we lose regulatory compliance and the SEC shuts us down." His confidence flickered slightly. "Well, I'm sure there are plenty of people who could. What about our backup systems? Do you know how our data gets replicated to our disaster recovery site in Milwaukee?" "That's automated, right?" "It's automated because I spent 6 months writing custom scripts that verify data integrity across multiple geographical locations while maintaining real-time synchronization. Without those scripts, a single corrupted file could cascade into millions of dollars in losses." Marcus's expression was getting tighter. "Sarah, I appreciate that you're thorough, but let's not pretend this is rocket science. It's IT support. Important IT support, but support nonetheless." That's when I knew Marcus Wellington was going to be a problem. Not just for me, but for everyone at Meridian Financial. He was the kind of manager who looked at complex systems and saw only the surface, who confused easy to use with easy to build, who thought that because he could send an email and use a smartphone, he understood technology. Over the next few weeks, Marcus made his presence felt throughout the company. He instituted new efficiency measures and brought in consultants who promised to streamline operations and eliminate redundancies. The writing was on the wall. I started documenting everything. Every system I maintained, every custom solution I'd built, every process that kept our infrastructure running. I created detailed technical documentation that any competent technician could follow. I wasn't planning to leave, but I'd learned long ago that preparation is the key to survival in corporate environments. The axe fell on a Friday afternoon in April. Marcus called me into his office, a corner space that used to belong to Janet Morrison, our former VP who actually understood that technology wasn't magic. "Sarah, I'm going to cut right to the chase," Marcus said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the uncomfortable chairs facing his oversized desk. "We're restructuring the IT department." Restructuring. We've decided to outsource most of our technical operations to Cloud Tech Solutions. They can provide the same services you've been doing at a fraction of the cost. I leaned back in the chair. "And what about me?" "Well, that's the thing. Your role is being eliminated. But I want you to know that we value your contributions over the years, so we're prepared to offer you a generous severance package." "How generous?" 6 weeks' pay, plus your accrued vacation time, and of course we'll provide positive references for your job search. 6 weeks. After 12 years of keeping their systems running, of working weekends when servers crashed, of being on call 24/7 for emergencies, they were offering me 6 weeks. "When does this take effect?" I asked. "Well, we'll need you to help with the transition, of course. Train the new team, document your processes. We're thinking 2 weeks should be enough time to get Cloud Tech up to speed. 2 weeks to transfer 12 years of institutional knowledge. 2 weeks to explain systems that had taken months to design and implement. 2 weeks to train outsourced technicians on infrastructure they'd never seen before. And after that? After that, you're free to pursue new opportunities. I'm sure someone with your experience will find something quickly." Marcus leaned forward with what he probably thought was a sympathetic expression. "Look, Sarah, I know this is hard to hear, but the reality is that technology has evolved. What used to require a senior technician can now be handled by entry-level staff or automated systems. It's not personal, it's just business." I nodded slowly. "Just business." "Exactly. We have to stay competitive. And that means making tough choices about resource allocation." I stood up. "I understand completely, Marcus. When do you want me to start the transition?" "Monday would be great. The Cloud Tech team will be here first thing in the morning." As I walked back to my desk, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because I was happy to be losing my job, but because I finally had clarity. Marcus Wellington had shown me exactly who he was and what he thought of me. More importantly, he'd shown me what he thought of the work I did. That weekend, I spent time organizing my personal files and removing anything that belonged to me from the office systems. I also spent a lot of time thinking about Marcus's words. What used to require a senior technician can now be handled by entry-level staff or automated systems. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that makes Chicago feel like it's judging you. I got to the office early as usual and found 3 young technicians from Cloud Tech Solutions waiting in the lobby. They looked eager and confident, armed with tablets and coffee cups, ready to revolutionize Meridian Financial's IT operations. Marcus introduced them to me with the enthusiasm of someone showing off a new toy. "Sarah, meet the Cloud Tech team. This is Derek, Amanda, and Josh. They'll be taking over your responsibilities." Derek, who couldn't have been older than 25, stepped forward with a firm handshake. "We're really excited to work with your system, Sarah. Marcus has told us you've done great work here, and we're looking forward to building on that foundation." Amanda nodded enthusiastically. "We've reviewed the basic network topology, and it looks pretty straightforward. Standard enterprise setup, right? I glanced at Marcus, who was beaming like a proud parent. Well, there are some custom configurations that might not be immediately obvious. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. No worries, Josh chimed in. We've handled lots of legacy systems. Once we get in there and clean things up, modernize the architecture, everything will run much smoother. Clean things up. Yeah, you know how it is with systems that have been around for a while. Lots of patches and workarounds that made sense at the time but aren't really best practices anymore. Marcus clapped his hands together. Great! So Sarah, why don't you give them the grand tour, show them where everything is, and then we can start the knowledge transfer process. I led the Cloud Tech team down to the server room. As we descended the stairs, I listened to them chat about their previous assignments, their confidence in modern automation tools, and their plans for optimizing Meridian's infrastructure. In the server room, I began the tour I'd given dozens of times to new employees, contractors, and auditors. But this time was different. This time, I was explaining not just what everything did, but why it was configured the way it was. This is our primary database cluster, I said, pointing to a bank of servers humming quietly in their rack. It handles all client transactions, portfolio data, and regulatory reporting. Derek pulled out his tablet and started taking notes. Standard MySQL setup? Actually, it's a custom-configured PostgreSQL implementation with real-time replication to our backup site. The configuration files are heavily modified to optimize for our specific transaction patterns. Amanda looked up from her own tablet. Why Postgres? MySQL would be much easier to maintain. Because our compliance requirements demand certain data integrity features that MySQL doesn't handle well. Also, we process about 2 million transactions per day during peak trading periods. The performance tuning took months to get right. Josh was examining the network cables. This wiring looks pretty complicated. Is all of this really necessary? I followed his gaze to what he saw as a tangle of cables, but what I knew was a carefully planned redundancy system. Every connection has a backup path. If any single cable, switch, or router fails, traffic automatically reroutes without interruption. We haven't had an unplanned outage in 3 years. 3 years? The last outage was when a construction crew cut through a fiber line 2 blocks away. Even then, we were back online in 12 minutes because of the redundant routing protocols. Derek was scrolling through something on his tablet. Our standard package includes 99.5% uptime guarantee. That should be more than sufficient for most business needs. I did the math in my head. 99.5% uptime means you're guaranteeing almost 2 days of downtime per year. We're currently running at 99.97% uptime. Well, sure, but the cost of maintaining that extra reliability probably isn't justified by the business value. That's when I realized the fundamental disconnect. To Derek, Amanda, and Josh, this was just another IT infrastructure project. They saw servers and switches and cables, and they thought in terms of standard solutions and acceptable downtime percentages. They had no idea that Meridian Financial wasn't just another company. We managed investment portfolios for pension funds, university endowments, and retirement accounts. When our systems went down, real people's life savings were at risk. When our data got corrupted, decades of financial planning could disappear. But Marcus had hired them because they were cheaper, and he'd convinced himself that cheaper meant just as good. I spent the rest of the day walking them through the major systems. The trading platform integration, the regulatory reporting modules, the client portal backend, the disaster recovery procedures. With each explanation, I watched their confidence waver slightly as they realized the complexity of what they were inheriting. By Wednesday, they were asking more detailed questions. By Friday, Derek had pulled me aside to ask if I had any documentation for the unusual networking configurations they'd discovered. It's all documented, I told him, handing over a thick binder. Every custom script, every configuration file, every integration point. He flipped through the pages, his expression growing more concerned. This is very thorough, but some of these implementations are pretty non-standard. They're non-standard because standard implementations don't work for our requirements. Right, but our team is trained on industry standard practices. This is going to take some time to learn. Marcus appeared at my shoulder. How's the transition going? Great, Derek said, a little too quickly. Sarah's been very helpful. We're just working through some of the more complex configurations. Excellent. Sarah, I know your last day is tomorrow, but I'm confident the team has everything they need. I looked at Derek, who was still holding the documentation binder like it might explode. Do you feel ready to take over? We'll figure it out, he said. That's what we do. That night, I went home to my apartment and sat on my couch with a glass of wine, thinking about what was about to happen. I'd done everything I could to prepare them. I'd documented every system, explained every process, answered every question. But I knew something that Marcus didn't understand, and that the cloud tech team was just beginning to suspect. Complex systems aren't just about technical knowledge. They're about understanding the subtle interdependencies, the edge cases, the historical decisions that shaped current configurations. They're about knowing which errors are critical and which are harmless, which alarms indicate real problems, and which are false positives. Most importantly, they're about the kind of deep system knowledge that comes only from years of hands-on experience with that specific environment. But Marcus had made his decision based on cost savings and his fundamental belief that technology work was interchangeable. He was about to learn that some savings come at a very high price. My last day at Meridian Financial was surprisingly quiet. I cleaned out my desk, returned my access cards, and said goodbye to colleagues who'd become friends over the years. Marcus was in meetings all day, but he stopped by my desk just before I left. Sarah, I want you to know that this decision wasn't a reflection on your work. You've been a dedicated employee, and I'm sure you'll do great things in your next role. Thank you, Marcus. The cloud tech team seems very capable. I think this transition is going to work out well for everyone. I looked around the office one last time, at the trading floor where brokers were wrapping up their day, at the client services department where representatives were handling the final calls, at the executive offices where decisions got made that affected thousands of people's financial futures. I hope so, I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, despite Marcus's condescension and his complete misunderstanding of what I did, I genuinely hoped that the cloud tech team would succeed. Because if they didn't, it wouldn't just be Marcus who suffered. It would be everyone at Meridian Financial, and ultimately, all the clients who trusted the company with their money. But as I walked out of the building for the last time, I had a sinking feeling that hope wasn't going to be enough. 3 weeks after leaving Meridian Financial, I was settling into my new routine. I'd taken some time off to decompress and think about my next career move. My severance package wasn't generous, but I'd been careful with money over the years so I could afford to be selective about my next opportunity. I was enjoying a quiet Tuesday morning coffee when my phone buzzed with a text from Elena Rodriguez, one of the senior traders I'd worked with for 7 years. Elena and I had developed a good working relationship. She understood technology enough to appreciate what I did, and I understood trading enough to know how critical uptime was during market hours. Sarah, are you available for a quick call? Something weird is happening with the systems. I called her back immediately. Hey Elena, what's going on? I don't know if I should be calling you about this, but the new IT guys seem confused. We've been having these intermittent slowdowns during peak trading hours. Nothing major, but when you're trying to execute $1 million trade and the system hesitates for even a few seconds, it's terrifying. Have you reported it to the cloud tech team? That's the thing. They keep saying everything looks normal on their end. They show us these dashboard screens with green lights and tell us the systems are performing within acceptable parameters. But Sarah, I've been trading for 15 years. I know what normal feels like, and this isn't it. I found myself leaning forward, my coffee forgotten. What kind of slowdowns? It's hard to describe. Like, the trading platform will freeze for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, then catch up all at once. Or sometimes, when I'm pulling up a client's portfolio, it takes forever to load, then suddenly everything appears. The new guys say it's probably just network congestion, but it never used to happen. When did this start? About a week ago. Right around the time they said they were optimizing the database performance. I felt a chill run down my spine. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are you calling me because you want me to try to fix this remotely, or are you calling because you're worried? There was a long pause. I'm worried, Sarah. Really worried. These aren't just minor glitches. Yesterday, I had a client's entire portfolio disappear from the system for about 10 minutes. It came back, but can you imagine if that had happened during a market crash? We could have lost millions. After Elena hung up, I sat staring at my phone. I'd expected there might be some growing pains as the cloud tech team learned the systems, but this sounded more serious than typical adjustment issues. Database optimization was one of the most dangerous things you could do to a live financial system. One wrong configuration change could corrupt years of transaction data. I tried to push the conversation out of my mind. It wasn't my problem anymore. Marcus had made that very clear. But over the next few days, I found myself thinking about Elena's call more and more. I'd spent 12 years building and maintaining those systems. I knew every potential failure point, every performance bottleneck, every configuration setting that could cause the kind of intermittent issues she'd described. Thursday morning, I got another call. This time it was James Patterson from the compliance department. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I got your number from Elena. We're having some issues with the regulatory reporting system, and honestly, I'm not getting clear answers from the new IT team. What kind of issues? Our daily SEC filings are coming out corrupted. Not completely broken, but there are data inconsistencies that are making the reports fail validation. The new guys keep saying they're working on it, but it's been going on for 3 days now. My blood ran cold. James, are you still able to submit your reports? We're having to generate them manually and submit them late. So far, we've been able to explain the delays to the regulators, but if this keeps happening, we're going to face serious compliance violations. What did the cloud tech team tell you was causing the problem? Something about legacy code integration issues and, quote, database synchronization protocols. To be honest, Sarah, I don't think they really understand what's wrong. After James hung up, I couldn't sit still. I paced around my apartment, trying to convince myself that this wasn't my responsibility. But I kept thinking about all the clients whose retirement funds were managed by Meridian Financial, all the pension plans that depended on those accurate reports. Friday afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca Kim from Client Services. Null. Sarah, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. We're having a major problem with the client portal, and I'm honestly scared we're going to lose accounts over this. What's happening? Clients are logging in and seeing other people's account information. Not all the time, but it's happened at least 6 times today. Mrs. Henderson called this morning absolutely furious because she logged in and saw someone else's portfolio worth 3 times what hers is worth. She thought we'd lost all her money. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Rebecca, that's a catastrophic security breach. What did the cloud tech team say? They said it was probably just a, quote, session management issue, and that they're working on a patch. But Sarah, what if clients start seeing each other's personal information? Social security numbers, addresses, phone numbers. We could be looking at massive identity theft liability. Have you reported this to Marcus? I tried, but he's been in meetings all week with some potential investors. His assistant said he'll address it when he gets back from his business trip next Monday. After Rebecca's call, I couldn't pretend this wasn't serious anymore. The issues Elena, James, and Rebecca had described weren't just growing pains. They were symptoms of fundamental problems with the core systems. The kind of problems that could destroy a financial services company. I spent the weekend researching cloud tech solutions online. What I found wasn't reassuring. They were a relatively new company, founded 3 years ago by 2 former software developers who'd pivoted to IT services. Their client list was mostly small businesses and nonprofits, nothing close to the complexity of a financial services firm like Meridian. Their website was full of buzzwords about cloud optimization and legacy system modernization, but I couldn't find any evidence that they'd ever managed the kind of high-stakes, heavily regulated environment that Meridian operated in. Monday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. Sarah, this is Derek from Cloud Tech. I hope you don't mind me calling you directly. Not at all. How can I help you? Well, we're running into some challenges with a few of the systems, and I was hoping you might have some insights. I know you're not with the company anymore, but what kind of challenges? The database cluster you set up is behaving in ways we didn't expect. We tried to implement some performance optimizations last week, and now we're seeing some strange behavior. What kind of strange behavior? Well, sometimes queries that should return in milliseconds are taking several seconds. And occasionally, we're getting data that doesn't seem to match what should be in the database. I closed my eyes. Derek, did you modify the Postgres configuration files? We made some adjustments to improve performance. Standard optimization procedures. Which parameters did you change? Mostly memory allocation settings and connection pooling configurations. Nothing too dramatic. Did you test those changes in a staging environment first? There was a pause. We implemented them during off hours to minimize disruption. Derek, did you implement database changes directly on the production system without testing them first? The changes were based on industry best practices. We didn't think there would be any issues. I felt my professional horror fighting with my personal satisfaction. They'd made rookie mistakes that I would have caught in the planning phase. But these weren't just any mistakes. They were the kind of errors that could bring down a financial services company. Derek, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Those Postgres systems are configured the way they are for very specific reasons. The memory allocation settings you probably changed are optimized for our specific transaction patterns. If you modified them without understanding the workload characteristics, you could have destabilized the entire database cluster. But the monitoring tools show everything is running within normal parameters. The monitoring tools don't understand the business logic. They can't tell you when a portfolio calculation is returning incorrect results, or when a trade execution is happening with stale data. So what do you think we should do? I took a deep breath. Derek, I think you need to roll back every change you made to the database configuration and start over. But more importantly, I think you need to tell Marcus exactly what's happening and how serious this is. We were hoping to fix it ourselves before he finds out you've been making unauthorized changes to production systems. Derek, this isn't a small business website. This is a regulated financial institution. The SEC, FINRA, and half a dozen other regulatory agencies can shut Meridian down if they discover that client data has been compromised or that financial reports are inaccurate. There was a long silence. Sarah, would you consider coming in as a consultant just to help us understand what we're dealing with? I looked out my apartment window at the Chicago skyline, thinking about Marcus Wellington's condescending smile, his certainty that I was just a technician, his belief that anyone could do what I did. I'm sorry, Derek, but I can't do that. I'm not employed by Meridian anymore, and I don't have the proper clearances or insurance to work on financial systems. You'll need to figure this out yourselves. But Sarah, Derek, I gave you comprehensive documentation. Everything you need to know is in those binders. You just need to take the time to understand it. After I hung up, I felt a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite sort out. Part of me was frustrated that they'd ignored my carefully crafted configurations in favor of standard optimizations. Part of me was worried about the clients and employees who would suffer if Meridian's systems failed. And part of me, if I'm being honest, was grimly satisfied that Marcus was about to learn exactly what just a technician was worth. Tuesday morning brought another call from Alina. Sarah, I think something really bad is about to happen. We've been having more system issues, and now there are rumors that some of the big clients are asking questions about our technology infrastructure. What kind of questions? Institutional clients do their own IT security audits, you know? Well, apparently Hartford Pension Fund sent their technical team to review our systems last week, and they left with what Rebecca called significant concerns. Did they say what specifically concerned them? Not officially, but I heard through the grapevine that they found evidence of recent unauthorized system modifications and inconsistent data integrity protocols. I felt my stomach drop. Hartford Pension Fund managed retirement accounts for over 200,000 people. If they pulled their assets from Meridian over security concerns, it would be a devastating blow to the company's reputation and financial stability. Elena, has anyone talked to Marcus about this? That's the thing, he's been traveling for 2 weeks, meeting with potential investors. I don't think he has any idea how bad things have gotten. What about the other executives? Janet Morrison might have been able to handle this, but she's gone. The other VPs don't really understand the technical side well enough to know how serious this is. Wednesday brought the call I'd been dreading. Sarah, this is Amanda from Cloud Tech. I know Derek called you earlier this week, but our situation has gotten worse. What's happened now? We've had a major system failure. The primary database cluster crashed during peak trading hours this morning. We've been trying to restore from backups, but we're running into some problems. What kind of problems? The backup systems aren't working the way we expected. We're getting error messages that don't match anything in our documentation. I felt cold dread settling in my chest. Amanda, describe exactly what you're seeing. Well, when we try to restore from the primary backup, we get integrity check failures. The backup system is saying the data is corrupted. But when we try to restore from the secondary backup, we get network connectivity errors to the Milwaukee site. Did you test the disaster recovery procedures? We assumed they were automated. Amanda, disaster recovery isn't just about having backups. It's about having tested, verified procedures for restoring operations. Did anyone from your team actually walk through the disaster recovery documentation I provided? We've been so focused on the day-to-day operations that we haven't had time to review all the documentation. How long have you been down? About 4 hours now. 4 hours. In the financial services industry, 4 hours of downtime during trading hours was catastrophic. Clients couldn't access their accounts, trades couldn't be executed, and regulatory reports couldn't be generated. Every minute of downtime was costing Meridian money and reputation. Amanda, I can't help you with this. You need to contact your escalation procedures and get senior technical staff involved immediately. Sarah, please, we're in over our heads here. We know we made mistakes, but we can't fix this without help. Then you need to call Marcus and tell him exactly what's happening. He needs to know that his cost-saving measures have put the entire company at risk. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone. I felt terrible for Amanda, Derek, and Josh. They were good people who'd been put in an impossible situation, but I also felt vindicated in a way that made me uncomfortable. Marcus Wellington was about to learn that some savings aren't worth the cost. Thursday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. Elena, James, Rebecca, and several other Meridian employees had been trying to reach me since 6 a.m. The message from Elena was the most direct. Sarah, Meridian is in crisis. We need your help. I called her back immediately. Sarah, thank God. Listen, I don't know what your situation is with the company, but we're facing a complete system collapse. Marcus flew back from his investor meetings yesterday and he's been in emergency meetings ever since. What's the current status? We've been down for almost 24 hours now. The Cloud Tech team managed to get some basic functionality restored, but we can't process trades, clients can't access their accounts, and we're facing regulatory violations for missed reporting deadlines. What about the backup systems? That's the problem. Apparently the backup systems were more complex than anyone realized. The Cloud Tech team got some data restored, but a lot of it is inconsistent or corrupted. I felt sick. Elena, how bad is it? Sarah, Hartford Pension Fund has already started the process to move their assets to another firm. 3 other institutional clients are demanding immediate audits. The SEC is asking questions about our operational resilience. And Marcus is finally starting to understand what we've lost. What do you mean? He's been asking for you. He wants to know if there's any way to get you back, even temporarily, to help fix this mess. I thought about Marcus's condescending smile, his certainty that I was easily replaceable, his belief that technology work was just a cost center to be optimized. Elena, I appreciate you calling, but I can't just walk back into Meridian and fix everything. Even if I wanted to, there are legal and professional liability issues. I'm not covered by their insurance anymore, I don't have the proper clearances, and I'm not authorized to make changes to their systems. But Sarah, you're the only one who really understands how everything works. I documented everything, Elena. Every system, every configuration, every procedure. The information is all there. But the Cloud Tech team says the documentation is too complex for them to implement quickly. Then they need to bring in senior-level consultants who can understand complex systems. But Elena, that's going to cost a lot more than my salary ever did. There was a long pause. Sarah, I know this isn't your problem anymore, but there are a lot of people here who are going to lose their jobs if Meridian goes under. And there are thousands of clients whose retirement savings are at risk. I knew Elena was right. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about all the innocent people who would suffer because of his poor decisions. But I also knew that I couldn't just fix this mess and walk away. If I was going to help, it would have to be on my terms. Elena, tell Marcus that if he wants to discuss bringing me back, he needs to call me directly. Not as a favor, not as a temporary consultant, but as a negotiation between two professionals. I'll tell him. An hour later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Wellington's name. Sarah, I'm glad you're willing to talk. We need your help. Hello, Marcus. I hear you're having some system issues. Sarah, I'm going to be direct. We made some mistakes with the transition, and we need someone who understands our infrastructure to help us recover. What kind of mistakes? There was a pause. The cloud tech team made some configuration changes that didn't work out as expected. We're looking at significant downtime and potential data loss. I see. And what exactly are you asking me to do? We'd like to bring you back as a senior consultant to help stabilize the systems and get us back to normal operations. Marcus, before we discuss terms, I need you to understand something. What's happened isn't just a series of mistakes. It's the predictable result of treating complex systems as if they were simple, and treating experienced technicians as if they were interchangeable. Sarah, I know I'm not finished. You told me that what I did could be handled by entry-level staff or automated systems. You said I was just a technician, and that technology was getting easier. You were wrong on every count, and now your company is paying the price for that arrogance. The line was quiet for a long moment. You're right, Marcus said finally. I underestimated the complexity of what you were doing, and I underestimated your value to the company. We made a serious mistake letting you go. Marcus, I appreciate the apology, but apologies don't fix corrupted databases or restore client confidence. If you want my help, we need to discuss this as a business arrangement between equals. What are your terms? I looked out my window at the city where I'd built my career, thinking about all the lessons I'd learned about the true value of expertise and the real cost of cutting corners. First, I want a formal consulting agreement that protects me legally and financially. Second, I want complete authority over all technical decisions related to system recovery. Third, I want a guarantee that any permanent position offered will come with appropriate compensation and respect for the role. And fourth, I want you to personally apologize to every employee who's been affected by this crisis, and I want you to acknowledge publicly that this situation resulted from poor management decisions, not technical failures. Sarah, some of those terms are going to be difficult to. Marcus, let me be very clear. Meridian Financial is facing potential regulatory sanctions, massive client defections, and possible bankruptcy. You can accept my terms, or you can try to find someone else who understands your systems well enough to fix them in time to save the company. How long do you think it would take to get everything back to normal? That depends on how much damage has been done. But Marcus, even if I can restore the systems, rebuilding client trust and regulatory confidence is going to take months. You've learned an expensive lesson about the difference between cost and value. I understand. Can you start immediately? I thought about everything that had led to this moment. Marcus's arrogance, the cloud tech team's inexperience, the cascading failures that were threatening to destroy a company that hundreds of people depended on for their livelihoods. I'll be there tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Have legal draw up the consulting agreement tonight. Thank you, Sarah. I know this is. Marcus, don't thank me yet. We'll see if there's enough left to save. As I hung up, I realized that this was only the beginning. The real test would be whether the systems could be restored, and whether Meridian Financial could survive the reputational damage. But one thing was certain. Marcus Wellington would never again dismiss someone as just a technician. I arrived at Meridian Financial at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before my agreed time. The building looked the same from the outside, but I could feel the tension the moment I walked through the lobby. Security guards who used to greet me with casual nods now looked stressed and tired. The usual morning bustle of employees grabbing coffee and chatting about their commutes was replaced by hushed conversations and worried expressions. Marcus was waiting for me at the elevator, and I barely recognized him. The confident, perfectly groomed executive I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, his tie was askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Sarah, thank you for coming. I can't tell you how much we appreciate this." "We'll see if appreciation is enough, Marcus. Where do we stand right now?" As we rode the elevator down to the server room, Marcus briefed me on the current crisis. The situation was worse than I'd imagined. Meridian had now been operating with severely limited functionality for 36 hours. The trading floor was essentially shut down, client services could only handle basic inquiries using backup phone systems, and the compliance department was frantically trying to explain to regulators why they'd missed multiple reporting deadlines. "The board held an emergency meeting last night," Marcus said as we descended. "3 board members have called for my resignation. Our stock price has dropped 40% since news of the outage leaked. And we've got a team of SEC investigators arriving this afternoon to assess our operational resilience." The elevator doors opened to reveal the server room I knew so well, but it looked like a war zone. Derek, Amanda, and Josh were huddled around laptops connected to various servers, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts. Multiple monitors displayed error messages and system alerts. The calm, organized environment I'd maintained for 12 years had been transformed into a chaos of emergency troubleshooting. Derek looked up as we entered, relief flooding his face. "Sarah, I'm so glad you're here. We've been trying to follow your documentation, but we're stuck on the disaster recovery sequence." I walked over to the main monitoring station and surveyed the damage. What I saw made my heart sink. Red alerts covered multiple screens, indicating failures across nearly every major system component. Database integrity warnings, network connectivity errors, backup system failures, security protocol violations. It was a complete infrastructure collapse. "Derek, walk me through exactly what happened, step by step. Start with the first modification you made after I left." For the next hour, Derek, Amanda, and Josh explained their actions over the past month. Each decision they described made the situation clearer and more dire. They'd approached Meridian's infrastructure like a standard IT environment, applying generic optimization techniques without understanding the specific requirements of a financial services firm. They'd modified database memory settings without understanding the transaction patterns that drove those configurations. They'd simplified network routing protocols without realizing that the complexity was designed to prevent exactly the kind of failures they were now experiencing. They'd updated security certificates without properly testing the authentication chains that connected to external trading systems. Most critically, they'd made these changes incrementally, without understanding how each modification affected the overall system stability. What started as minor performance optimizations had created a cascade of interdependent failures that brought down the entire infrastructure. "The worst part," Amanda admitted, "is that we didn't realize how serious the problems were until yesterday's crash. We thought the intermittent issues were just growing pains." I turned to Marcus, who had been listening with growing horror. "Marcus, do you understand what they're telling you?" "I think so. They made changes that caused the systems to fail." "It's more than that. They've essentially performed unauthorized surgery on a patient without understanding the anatomy. Every change they made was based on generic best practices that don't apply to your specific environment." "But surely we can just reverse the changes and get back to where we were?" I pulled up a diagnostic screen that showed the current database status. "Look at this, Marcus. The database cluster isn't just configured wrong, it's corrupted. Some of the changes they made have resulted in data inconsistencies that can't be simply rolled back." Marcus stared at the screen, trying to process what I was telling him. "What does that mean?" "It means we can't just flip a switch and restore everything to the way it was. We need to rebuild significant portions of the infrastructure from scratch, and we need to verify the integrity of every piece of financial data before the systems can go live again." "How long will that take?" I looked around the server room, calculating the scope of work required. database reconstruction, network reconfiguration, security certificate renewal, disaster recovery testing, data integrity verification, regulatory compliance validation, and all of it had to be done while the company was bleeding money and reputation every hour they remained offline. If everything goes perfectly and we have no additional surprises, at least a week. More realistically, 2 weeks. Marcus went pale. Sarah, we can't survive 2 weeks of downtime. We're already facing massive client defections and regulatory scrutiny. 2 more weeks, and there won't be a company left to save. Then we need to get creative about our recovery strategy. I spent the next hour developing a triage plan. Instead of trying to restore everything at once, we would prioritize the most critical systems and bring them online incrementally. Client access first, then basic trading functionality, then regulatory reporting, then full operational capacity. But even this accelerated approach would require resources that cloud tech simply couldn't provide. Derek, I need you to be honest with me. What's your team's experience with Postgres reconstruction? We've done some basic database administration, but nothing like what you're describing. Network routing protocol configuration? We're more familiar with standard enterprise networking. The custom configurations you implemented are beyond our current expertise. Financial services security compliance? Amanda shook her head. We've never worked in a regulated environment before. I turned to Marcus. We need additional technical resources immediately. Senior database administrators, network security specialists, compliance experts. The cloud tech team is willing to learn, but we can't use this crisis as a training opportunity. How much will that cost? A lot more than my salary would have cost. You're looking at emergency consulting rates from multiple specialists, probably $500 to $800 per hour per consultant. And we'll need at least 6 people working around the clock. Marcus did the math in his head, and I watched his face cycle through shock, anger, and resignation. So we're talking about spending in a week what we thought we'd save in a year. Marcus, that's just the immediate recovery cost. The long-term damage to your reputation, the regulatory fines, the client defections, the legal liability, those costs will be orders of magnitude higher. What choice do we have? You can authorize me to bring in the resources we need, or you can hope that cloud tech can figure it out on their own. But Marcus, every hour we delay increases the likelihood that Meridian Financial won't survive this crisis. While Marcus made phone calls to arrange for emergency consulting resources, I began the delicate process of assessing what could be salvaged from the current systems. The database corruption was extensive, but not total. About 60% of the data appeared to be intact and could be verified for accuracy. The network infrastructure was in better shape. Most of the custom routing protocols could be restored from backup configurations, though it would require careful testing to ensure that the modifications cloud tech had made hadn't created hidden vulnerabilities. The security systems were the biggest concern. Financial services firms operate under strict regulatory requirements for data protection and access control. The certificate updates and authentication changes cloud tech had implemented had created gaps in the security architecture that would need to be completely rebuilt before regulators would allow the systems to handle live client data. By afternoon, I had assembled a crisis response team. Margaret Chen, a senior Postgres specialist I'd worked with at a previous company, flew in from Seattle to lead the database reconstruction. Thomas Rodriguez, one of the best network security engineers in Chicago, agreed to take on the infrastructure hardening. Lisa Washington, a former SEC compliance officer turned consultant, would ensure that our recovery procedures met regulatory requirements. The cost was staggering. We were burning through $15,000 per day in consulting fees alone, but it was the only way to compress what should have been months of recovery work into a manageable timeframe. Sarah, Marcus said as we watched the expanded team set up their workstations, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. What is it? Do you think we can actually save the company? I looked around the server room, where 7 technical experts were working frantically to undo the damage caused by well-intentioned but inexperienced modifications. I thought about the client calls Rebecca was fielding upstairs, the regulatory investigators who would arrive in a few hours, the board members who were already preparing for the possibility of bankruptcy. I think we can restore the technical systems, I said finally. But Marcus, the technical problems are only part of your crisis. You've lost client trust, regulatory confidence, and employee morale. Even if we get everything working perfectly, you're going to be dealing with the consequences of this failure for years. What do you think I should tell the board? Tell them the truth. Tell them that cutting costs on critical infrastructure was a mistake that nearly destroyed the company. Tell them that expertise has real value, and that some roles can't be outsourced to the lowest bidder. Marcus nodded slowly. Sarah, I owe you an apology. Not just for the situation we're in now, but for how I treated you when I made the decision to let you go. I appreciate that, Marcus. I genuinely believed that technology had become simple enough that anyone could manage it. I thought that because I could use a smartphone and send emails, I understood how IT systems worked. That's a common mistake in executive leadership. Technology looks simple from the user perspective, but the underlying complexity is often invisible. I also believed that all technical work was basically the same. That a network technician was a network technician, regardless of experience or expertise. Marcus, would you hire a first-year medical student to perform heart surgery just because they'd studied anatomy? Of course not. Then why did you think you could replace someone with 12 years of specialized experience in financial systems with recent graduates who'd never worked in a regulated environment? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because I didn't understand what you actually did. I saw servers and cables and thought it was just hardware maintenance. I didn't realize you were essentially the architect and guardian of our entire technological infrastructure. Most executives don't. That's why so many companies make the same mistake you did. How many other companies have you seen go through something like this? More than you'd think. The technology industry is full of stories about companies that tried to cut costs by replacing experienced technicians with cheaper alternatives, only to discover that institutional knowledge can't be easily transferred. What usually happens to those companies? It depends on how quickly they recognize the problem and how much damage has been done. Some recover and learn from the experience. Others don't survive the crisis. Which category do you think we're in? I watched Margaret work through a complex database integrity check, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she executed commands I'd taught her years ago. I saw Thomas methodically testing network connections, rebuilding the security architecture that had taken me months to design. I observed Lisa reviewing our compliance procedures, identifying gaps that needed to be addressed before the SEC investigators arrived. We'll know in the next few days, I said. But Marcus, even if we save Meridian Financial, you need to understand that this crisis was completely preventable. Every problem we're dealing with now was a predictable consequence of the decisions you made. I'm beginning to understand that. Are you? Because I'm not just talking about the technical problems. I'm talking about the fundamental disrespect you showed for expertise and experience. I'm talking about the arrogance of assuming that complex work could be easily simplified. Marcus looked around the server room, taking in the scene of highly paid specialists working frantically to undo damage that could have been avoided entirely. Sarah, if we get through this, if the company survives, I want to offer you a permanent position, not as a technician but as Director of Technology Infrastructure. With appropriate compensation? Whatever it takes. I've learned that the cost of not having the right expertise is far higher than the cost of hiring and retaining it. And what about the cloud tech team? That's up to you. If you think they can be trained and developed, we'll keep them on under your supervision. If not, we'll find roles for them that match their actual skill level. I looked at Derek, Amanda, and Josh, who were watching our conversation with obvious anxiety. They were good people who'd been put in an impossible situation by poor management decisions. They need extensive training before they can work independently on systems in this complex. But they're willing to learn, and they understand now what they didn't understand before. What's that? That being a technician isn't just about following procedures or applying standard solutions. It's about understanding the deep interconnections between systems, anticipating failure modes that aren't in any manual, and making decisions that balance technical requirements with business needs. Is that what you've been doing all these years? That's what every senior technician does, Marcus. We're not just fixing computers or maintaining hardware. We're managing the technological nervous system that makes modern business possible. As the day progressed, our crisis team made steady progress. Margaret had isolated and reconstructed the corrupted database segments. Thomas had restored the network security protocols and was testing the disaster recovery procedures. Lisa had prepared documentation showing our compliance status for the SEC investigators. But the real test would come when we attempted to bring the systems back online with live data. "Sarah," Derek said as we prepared for the first restoration attempt, "I want you to know that I understand now why you configured everything the way you did. Every setting that seemed overly complex or unnecessarily redundant. It all makes sense now that I've seen what happens when those safeguards fail." Derek, complexity isn't always a sign of poor design. Sometimes it's a sign of sophisticated engineering that accounts for real-world requirements that aren't immediately obvious. I wish we'd understood that before we started making changes. You understand it now. That's what matters going forward. At 8:30 p.m., 39 hours after the initial system failure, we successfully brought the primary database cluster back online. Margaret ran a series of integrity checks while I monitored the network performance, and Thomas verified the security protocols. "Data integrity is good," Margaret announced. "All critical financial records appear to be intact and properly synchronized." "Network performance is within normal parameters," Thomas reported. "Security protocols are functioning correctly." "Compliance status is green across all regulatory requirements," Lisa confirmed. I looked at the monitoring screens, seeing the familiar pattern of green lights and normal status indicators that I'd maintained for 12 years. For the first time since arriving that morning, I allowed myself to feel cautiously optimistic. "Marcus, we're ready to begin the phased restoration. Client portal first, then basic trading functionality." Over the next 6 hours, we systematically brought Meridian Financial back to life. Client accounts became accessible, trading systems came online, regulatory reporting resumed normal operation. Each system restoration was carefully tested and verified before moving to the next phase. By 3 a.m. Friday morning, 43 hours after the crisis began, Meridian Financial was fully operational again. But as I looked around the server room at the exhausted faces of the crisis team, I knew that the real work was just beginning. Restoring the technical systems was only the first step in rebuilding the trust and confidence that had been shattered by this preventable disaster. "Sarah," Marcus said as the specialists began packing up their equipment, "I know this is just the beginning. We still have to deal with client relations, regulatory investigations, and board oversight." "That's right. And Marcus, you need to understand that this crisis will follow Meridian Financial for years. Every client presentation, every regulatory review, every business partnership discussion will include questions about operational resilience and risk management. What do you recommend? Transparency. Acknowledge what went wrong, explain what you've learned, and demonstrate that you've made the changes necessary to prevent it from happening again." "And you? Will you stay and help us rebuild?" I thought about everything that had happened over the past 2 days. The crisis, the recovery, the lessons learned about the true value of expertise and experience. "I'll stay, Marcus, but not because you're offering me more money or a better title." "Then why?" "Because I believe in what we do here. Because there are thousands of people whose financial security depends on these systems working correctly. And because I want to make sure that no one ever again dismisses the importance of technical expertise in an organization like this." Marcus nodded. "I understand. And Sarah, thank you for teaching me what just a technician really means." As the sun rose over Chicago, I stood in the server room that had been my professional home for so many years, watching the steady blink of status lights that indicated all systems were running normally. The crisis was over, but the real lessons were just beginning to be learned. Meridian Financial would survive, but Marcus Wellington would never again make the mistake of underestimating the value of expertise, experience, and institutional knowledge. And neither would anyone else who heard this story. The boardroom at Meridian Financial had never felt so tense. I sat at the polished mahogany table, reviewing my quarterly infrastructure report, while board members filed in for what everyone knew would be a pivotal meeting. 6 months had passed since the crisis that nearly destroyed the company, and today we would learn whether Meridian Financial had truly recovered, or if we were still fighting for survival. Marcus entered last, carrying a thick folder of documents. He looked different now, more humble, more thoughtful. The arrogant confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by something more genuine. He nodded to me as he took his seat. "Before we begin the formal presentations," Board Chairman Robert Hayes announced, "I want to address the elephant in the room." 6 months ago, this company faced an existential crisis that cost us millions of dollars, damaged our reputation, and nearly resulted in regulatory sanctions. Today, we're here to assess our recovery and determine our path forward. Hayes turned to Marcus. "Marcus, why don't you start by summarizing where we stand financially?" Marcus opened his folder and began presenting numbers that told the story of our recovery. The immediate crisis had cost Meridian Financial $8.2 million in emergency consulting fees, lost revenue, and regulatory fines. 3 major institutional clients had moved their assets to competitors, taking $240 million in managed funds with them. Our stock price had recovered only partially, still trading 15% below pre-crisis levels. However, Marcus continued, our operational improvements over the past 6 months have positioned us for long-term growth. We've invested heavily in infrastructure redundancy, staff training, and compliance protocols. Our system reliability has improved dramatically, and we've begun winning back client confidence. Board member Patricia Williams leaned forward. "Marcus, these numbers represent the most expensive lesson in corporate history. How can you assure us that we'll never face a similar crisis again?" Marcus looked directly at me. "Patricia, I think Sarah can answer that question better than I can." I stood and activated the presentation screen. 6 months ago, we learned that treating critical infrastructure as a cost center rather than a strategic asset nearly destroyed this company. Today, I can show you what we've built to ensure that never happens again. My presentation covered the comprehensive infrastructure overhaul we'd implemented. New redundant systems that could handle 3 times our current transaction volume. Advanced monitoring tools that detected problems before they became critical. Disaster recovery procedures that had been tested monthly rather than assumed to work. Staff training programs that ensured every technical team member understood both the business requirements and the technical implementations. Most importantly, I continued, we've established a culture where technical expertise is valued and respected. Our technical staff aren't just support anymore. They're recognized as the professionals who enable every business function in this company. Board member David Chen raised his hand. "Sarah, this infrastructure investment represents a significant ongoing cost. How do we justify these expenses to shareholders?" "David, let me put this in perspective. Our monthly infrastructure budget is now $180,000. That sounds expensive, until you consider that 6 months ago, we spent $8.2 million in a single week trying to recover from infrastructure failures. We're essentially paying insurance premiums to prevent catastrophic losses. But couldn't we achieve similar results with less expensive solutions?" I clicked to the next slide, which showed a comparison chart. We evaluated 12 different cost reduction proposals over the past 6 months. Every single one would have created single points of failure that could reproduce the same crisis we just survived. The board has to decide whether Meridian Financial is committed to operational excellence or willing to gamble on cheaper alternatives. The room was quiet as board members absorbed the implications. Finally, Hayes spoke up. "Sarah, what's your professional recommendation for moving forward?" "Continue investing in excellence. Our current infrastructure can handle 300% growth without major modifications. Our technical team is cross-trained on every critical system. Our disaster recovery procedures are tested and verified. We're not just back to where we were, we're better positioned than we've ever been." Marcus stood up. "If I may add something, Robert, the past 6 months have taught me that the most expensive mistakes come from undervaluing expertise. Sarah and her team aren't just maintaining computers. They're managing the technological foundation that makes everything else possible. After the board meeting concluded with unanimous approval for continued infrastructure investment, Marcus asked me to stay behind. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. I've been offered a position with Hartwell Industries, their VP of Strategic Operations role. It's a significant opportunity, and I'm planning to accept it. I wasn't entirely surprised. Marcus had been rebuilding his reputation within the industry, and his hard-earned expertise in crisis management and infrastructure investment had made him valuable to other companies. Congratulations, Marcus. When do you start? Next month. But that's not what I wanted to discuss with you. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sarah, the board has asked me to recommend my replacement. I've told them that my successor needs to understand that technology isn't just a support function. It's a strategic capability that drives business success. That's a significant change in perspective. It's the most important lesson I've learned. And I've recommended that they promote you to VP of Operations. I stared at him, processing what he'd just said. Marcus, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not sure I'm interested in moving away from hands-on technical work. That's what makes you the right person for the job. You understand both the technical requirements and the business implications. You've proven that you can manage crises, lead technical teams, and communicate effectively with executives and board members. What would happen to my current role? We'd promote Derek to Director of Technology Infrastructure with your mentorship. He's learned more in the past 6 months than most technicians learn in years, and he's developed genuine expertise in our specific systems. I thought about Derek's transformation over the past 6 months. The crisis had been a brutal education, but he'd emerged as a genuinely skilled professional who understood the complexity and responsibility of managing critical infrastructure. Have you discussed this with the board? Informally. They're very interested in keeping you in a leadership role, and they understand that your technical background is exactly what we need in operations management. 2 weeks later, I found myself back in the same boardroom, this time being formally offered the position of Vice President of Operations. The salary was substantial, the responsibilities were challenging, and the opportunity to influence how technology was valued throughout the organization was compelling. But more than anything, I was motivated by the chance to ensure that no other company would make the same mistakes that had nearly destroyed Meridian Financial. Sarah Hayes said as I reviewed the offer documents, "We want you to know that this promotion isn't just about rewarding your crisis management. It's about recognizing that operational excellence requires leaders who understand the technical foundations of modern business." "I accept," I said. "But I have some conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "First, I want to establish a formal technical mentorship program so that we're always developing the next generation of expertise. Second, I want to create industry partnerships where we share best practices with other financial services firms. Third, I want to implement quarterly infrastructure assessments that prevent small problems from becoming major crises." Approved. Anything else? "I want us to become a case study for how companies should value and manage technical expertise. I want other executives to learn from Marcus's mistakes without having to repeat them." 6 months after that, I stood on the stage at the National Financial Services Technology Conference, delivering a keynote presentation about the true cost of undervaluing technical expertise. The audience included hundreds of executives, technologists, and industry analysts who had come to learn about infrastructure resilience and crisis prevention. "A year ago," I told the audience, "I was dismissed as, quote, just a technician by an executive who believed that technology work was simple and interchangeable. Today, I'm here to share what that mistake cost and what we learned from it." I presented Meridian Financial's story as a cautionary tale about the hidden complexity of modern technology infrastructure. I explained how seemingly simple systems actually represent layers of specialized knowledge that can't be easily transferred or replaced. I demonstrated the financial impact of treating technical expertise as a commodity rather than recognizing it as a strategic asset. The lesson isn't just about respecting technicians, I concluded. It's about understanding that in today's economy, technology isn't separate from business. It is the business. Companies that recognize this truth will thrive. Companies that don't will face the same crisis we survived. During the Q&A session, a familiar figure approached the microphone. It was Marcus Wellington, now thriving in his role at Hartwell Industries. "Sarah, I was the executive you mentioned who made those costly mistakes." I want to publicly acknowledge that your presentation accurately describes how my arrogance and ignorance nearly destroyed a company and hurt hundreds of employees. I also want to thank you for teaching me lessons that have made me a better leader." The audience applauded as Marcus continued. "I've implemented Sarah's infrastructure principles at Hartwell Industries, and we've seen dramatic improvements in operational reliability and employee satisfaction. The most important lesson is that expertise has real value, and leaders who don't recognize that value do so at their own peril." After the conference, Marcus and I sat in the hotel bar, reflecting on how much had changed since that first confrontation in the server room. "Sarah, do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been so stubborn about bringing you back? Honestly, I think Meridian Financial would have failed completely. The damage was too extensive for the cloud tech team to fix on their own, and thousands of people would have lost their jobs because of my arrogance. Marcus, you learned from your mistakes. Not every executive does. I learned because you taught me. You could have walked away and let us fail, but you came back and saved the company. I came back because it was the right thing to do. But I also came back because I wanted to prove a point about the value of technical expertise. Mission accomplished. How many companies have reached out to you since your keynote?" 47. Apparently there are a lot of executives who want to avoid making the same mistakes you made. Marcus laughed. "So my failures have become your business opportunities. Your failures have become teaching moments for the entire industry." As we finished our drinks, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. A year ago, I was a senior technician whose expertise was dismissed and undervalued. Today, I was a VP leading infrastructure initiatives for one of the most stable financial services firms in the country. But more importantly, I had become an advocate for recognizing and respecting technical expertise throughout the business world. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you really understand now what just a technician means?" He smiled and shook his head. "Sarah, there's no such thing as just a technician. There are only professionals who understand complex systems and leaders who are smart enough to value that understanding." Exactly. The next morning, I flew back to Chicago and returned to my office at Meridian Financial. My desk was covered with requests from companies seeking consulting on infrastructure resilience, speaking invitations for technology conferences, and strategic planning documents for our continued growth. But on my computer screen was an email that made me smile. Derek had successfully completed a major server migration over the weekend, implementing all the redundancy and testing protocols we developed together. His technical report was thorough, professional, and demonstrated the kind of deep system understanding that could only come from months of dedicated learning. "Just a technician," I muttered to myself, remembering Marcus's dismissive words from so long ago. Today, Derek was leading a team of 6 technical specialists who managed infrastructure for a company that processed billions of dollars in transactions every year. Amanda had been promoted to Senior Security Administrator and was pursuing additional certifications in financial services compliance. Josh had discovered a talent for database optimization and was working on a master's degree in information systems. They weren't just technicians any more than I had ever been. They were professionals who had learned to value expertise, understand complexity, and take pride in the critical work they performed. And in companies across the country, executives were learning the same lesson that Marcus had learned the hard way, that in a technology-driven economy, respecting and investing in technical expertise isn't just good management, it's essential for survival. The cost of treating experts as replaceable commodities is always higher than the cost of recognizing their true value. Marcus Wellington learned that lesson at nearly the price of his entire company. But thanks to that expensive education, countless other companies would avoid making the same mistake. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are also the most costly ones. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.